Good morning, everyone. Imagine you are a Form 2 student, you walk into a science class. So, when you open your textbook, and today's topic is acid and alkalis. So, immediately you see words like acidic, alkaline, pH values, and indicators. So, immediately you feel very overwhelming before even the lesson begins. So now, let me ask you a question. Is it science really difficult, or is it the way sometimes we present it and we make it difficult? So that question actually stayed in my mind while I was planning this project. So good teaching is not only about delivering information, it's about creating an experience that actually helps students to understand, explore, and enjoy learning. So, with that idea in my mind, I designed two connected projects. So, the first project was actually creating an interactive assessment using Wayground, and the second project builds a complete learner centered online learning environment using Google Classroom. So, together, these two projects aim to transform a traditional science lesson into a more engaging and also meaningful learning experience. So today I would like to share the journey with you. So before I start designing anything, I first asked myself what kind of learning experience would I want if I were the student. So most students today are already very familiar with technologies. They use smartphones every day. They watch YouTube, they learn from videos. They also enjoy games and interactive activities. So instead of asking students to learn through textbooks, worksheets, I wanted to bring learning into digital environment that feels more natural to them. So the first project was focuses on assessment, and the second project is fully focuses on complete learning journey. So although they are two different projects, they actually support each other. So the quiz helps students to practice what they have learned. The Google Classroom provides an environment where learning actually happens. Together, they create a learner-centered learning experience instead of teacher-centered one. So let me begin with project one. So when most students hear the word quiz, they immediately think about marks. They become very nervous. They worry that about getting wrong answers. But actually, I wanted to change that. Instead of making assessment something very stressful, I wanted it to become a part of learning process. That is why I actually selected Wayground. So Wayground is actually an interactive learning platform that actually allows students to answer questions in a very fun way and also engaging. So for this project, I created quiz consists of 15 multiple choice questions. The questions cover the main concept student need to understand. For example, student answer questions about the properties of alkaline, pH scales, indicator, and example of acid and alkaline, sorry. Then they even see what they see in everyday life. So I didn't simply like choose random questions. So every question was selected based on the learning objective that I want my student to achieve. So for example, if one learning objective is for students to identify the properties of acid, then the quiz will definitely include questions that actually test whether student can recognize those properties. If another objective is understanding the pH scale, so then the quizzes will include questions regarding the page scales and to test whether how much they understand about page scale. So every question actually has a purpose. It is directly connected to what student are expected to learn. So another reason I actually chose Wayground is because it always gives immediate feedback. So I personally think this is something very important and is one of the strongest feature. Imagine answer a question incorrectly. Instead of waiting until teacher marks your paper after weeks later, you will immediately know the correct answer. So students can actually identify their mistakes while the lesson is still fresh in their mind. So this actually allow the learning to happen immediately. At the same time, teacher can also monitor students' performance. If many students answer the same questions incorrectly, the teacher can immediately knows which concept requires more explanation or in which concept students are actually has a very poor understanding. So background is not only useful for students, it is also a valuable tool for teachers. Assessment is not longer just about giving marks, it become another opportunity for learning. So, however, while I was actually designing the quiz, I realized something important also. A quiz is alone cannot be easier to teach an entire topic. So students actually need first need a proper guidance. They need explanation. They need examples. They also need opportunities to ask questions and discuss ideas. So that realization actually inspired me to do my second project. So, for my second project, I actually designed a complete online learning environment using Google Classroom. So, I selected Classroom is because it is very simple, organized, and also accessible. Most importantly, it actually allow every students uh, need to learn to be stored in one place. So everything will be in one place, and they can just sit and do their reading in just one go. So students can actually access the classroom anytime using their laptop, tablet, or smartphones. So this actually supports learning not only during classrooms but outside of the school hours. So when designing this classroom, I didn't want it to become a place where teachers simply upload notes. Instead, I wanted to feel guided throughout the learning process. So when students enter the classroom, they immediately know where to begin. They can clearly see the learning modules, the activities, and the order they should complete them. So it is in a very organized and well ordered form. So everything actually follows a logical sequence, and this also reduces confusion and allows students to focus on learning instead of trying to figure out what they should do next. So another reason actually for choosing Google Classroom is because it actually encourages independent learning. Students are very free to revisit videos, review notes, repeat quizzes, and participate in discussion whenever they need. This means learning is no longer limited in classroom timetable, so students can actually learn from their own pace, still receiving guidance from the teacher. So for me, this is what learner center learning is all about: giving students the opportunity to take the ownership of their own learning while teacher continue to guide and support them. So now that we have the classroom, the next question becomes how do students actually learn inside it? So that actually bring me to the next part of my presentation, the learning journey. So now that you have seen the Google Classroom homepage, let me show you how I organize the learning content. So one thing I wanted to avoid was overwhelming students with too much of information at once. Instead of uploading everything into one folder, I divide the topic into smaller learning modules. So the modules were arranged in a very logical sequence. So students first learn the introduction to acid and alkali. After understanding the basic concept, and then they can move on to properties of acid, followed by properties of alkalis, the pH scale, and also the indicators. So once all the modules are completed, student actually can take a final assessment. So I initially arranged the module this way because learning should happen step by step. So student will also have a very strong foundation before they can actually understand more advanced concepts. So if they, let's say, they don't understand what an acid and alkali is, it will be very difficult for them to actually understand the indicators or the page scale later. So rather than giving the students everything at once, I wanted to guide them through the topic gradually. So this also helps students to feel more confident because they complete one small goal before moving to another one. So for me, learning is like climbing staircase. So they'll be like learning one by one. So students will be doing it one step at a time until they reach the final assessment. So this slide actually shows what I believe is the heart of my project. So every module follows exactly the same learning journey. So I keep this structure very consistent because students shouldn't waste more time trying to understand the instruction in every lesson. So instead, they can actually completely on learning. So the first activity is actually they will be watching a YouTube video. I selected videos that actually explain the concepts using very simple language and also visual demonstration. So science becomes much easier for them to understand when students actually see examples instead of just reading about them. So after watching the video, students will move on to the poster part. So where the posters were all these posters were all created using ChatGPT. I initially I actually add in like what content it should be. All the content I just add it into ChatGPT, and then it actually helped me provide the perfect posters in a mind map version. So it was very easy for it will be very easy students to actually read it, understand it. So other than that, if let's say I do like a very long paragraphs, I don't think so student would even able to sit and watch or sit and read the whole thing. And the process actually only highlights important, allowing students to review the topic very quickly. So once students understand the content, they complete a background quiz. This is not just another test. This quiz actually allows the student to check whether they really understood the lesson before moving forward. If they answer incorrectly, they receive immediately feedback. The feedback was very immediate, and also they can actually review the topic again and again. So after completing the quiz, students can also must also answer discussion question because in every classroom I just add in one discussion question, and even after ending all the modules I even add a few discussion question for students to answer and have like a forum kind of talk. And I also think this is very important because very important in the learning process, because learning should not be very like one way communication where the teacher talks and student listens. Students should also have to have the opportunities to express their ideas. So when I open the platform for them to discuss, so obviously they will add in what kind of questions they have, what is in their mind. So it will be easier for me to understand how much how what level are they in their understanding. So by answering the discussion questions, they also will learn from one another. For example, when a student A say something, student B can also reply for student A, something like that. So finally, after completing every module, students take the final assessment. So this assessment measures their overall understanding of the topic. So rather than simply reading notes, students will watch, understand, practice, discuss, and finally apply what they have learned. So this is actually the learning journey I really wanted to create. And of course, I didn't design these activities very randomly. So every decision follows with a instructional design process. So to actually organize this learning environment, I used ADDIE instructional design model. So which we obviously know we have the first stage is analyzing. So this is how I analyze. Here I identify my targeted learners. Since my learners are actually Form 2 students, I consider this age, background knowledge, and their familiarity with technology is wide. It's very wide, and this also actually helped me to choose activities that actually match their learning needs. The second stage is design. So during this phase, I developed the learning objectives based on Bloom's taxonomy. I also planned learning modules, decided how students would actually move from one activity to another. The third stage is actually development. So these were actually learning materials were created. I selected YouTube videos, designing educational poster using ChatGPT, developed background quizzes, and also organized everything inside Google Classroom. So the fourth stage is implementation. So in this stage, student actually start learning the environment through Google Classroom. They also complete every activity following the learning journey I showed earlier. So the final stage is actually evaluation. So students' learning is evaluate through module quizzes, discussion activities, and also the final assessment. So at the same time, teachers can actually review students' progress and identify areas where additional support is needed. So using ADDIE actually helped me to make sure every activity had a clearer purpose instead of just being added randomly. So, however, technology does not automatically make learning as a learner center. That it is what really matters is how students actually do that. So, this actually brings me to one of the most important ideas behind my project. So, which is learner center learning. So many people think that learning center is means simply means using technology. I don't completely agree to that. Technology is one of the tool. What makes the learning center is giving students an active flow throughout the learning process. So in my classroom, students will never be very passive learners. They don't just sit and listen, but instead they will start very active participation in every lesson. They will watch video, they will read visual posters, they'll answer quizzes, and they also will receive immediate feedback. So this actually they will also participate in the discussions. So in every activity, it actually requires students to think, respond, and also interact. Another important feature is flexibility. Students can actually revisit the videos anytime and whenever they need, so there will be no harm for them to wait every time for me to upload because I have to upload everything together in the learning environment. So, as for teacher, our role also changes. Instead of being the only source of information, we became facilitator who guides students throughout the learning journey. So, I believe this actually create more meaningful learning experience because students are very actively constructing their own understanding rather than simply memorizing the information. This is why I describe my project as a learner-centered learning environment. So now that students have completed all these learning activities, how do we know whether the learning is actually taken place? Like, so the answer is actually the assessment. So now, how can we actually measure whether students are actually learning? So this was the main question for me to even start creating assessment for students. So assessment should not only be something students complete at the end of the lessons. Instead, assessment should become a part of their learning process. So this is why I included both formative and also summative assessment in the learning environment. So let's begin with formative assessment. So in every module, they will be including short background quiz. So students can actually immediately complete the quiz right after they start watching the video and also reading the posters. So the purpose of all these quizzes is not simply just to give students marks, but instead they help students check whether they have like a proper understanding about the lesson or before moving to the next module. So if students answer incorrectly, they immediately know which concept they need to revise, like which one they need to prevent. Like they can also understand which misconceptions from continuing throughout the lessons. So for teachers, formative assessment is also equally very important. Teachers can actually identify like which concept most students are struggling with and provide additional explanation before continuing it. So even after some students complete all the learning modules, they will move on to the summative assessment. The final assessment actually combines all the topics, like all the concepts they have learned, all the subtopics. So it also measures students' overall understanding of acid and alkalis, rather than their understanding of just one lesson. I also selected Wayground because it actually provides an immediate feedback. Students do not need to wait until teacher marks like every answer. They can actually instantly see their result and also reflect on the learning. So I actually believe that this feedback is one of the most like very important part of the assessment, because students actually learn most of it when they understand why an answer goes wrong, like why it's correct, why it's not correct. So the assessment should not only measure the learning, it should also support the learning. That was my main idea behind the assessment design. So when I actually first started the project, I honestly thought creating an online learning environment would be very simple. But as I imagined, it was mainly about uploading a lot of notes and quizzes, videos on Google Classroom. However, as I worked through the project, I realized there is much more actually. Like every activity should have a very clear purpose. Every learning material should help students achieve learning objective. One challenge I faced was deciding how much information to include. Like science contains many important facts, but if I could include too much of information, students might feel very overwhelmed. So to solve this, I decided to replace uh, long written notes with a very colorful posters. As I highlight, like the main point were literally highlighted, and also the content was very easier for them to understand. Like it's a one-page poster, so even they can have it in their smartphone, even if you have their wallpaper or something, just memorize certain facts. So another challenge was keeping students actively engaged throughout the lesson. So instead of relying only one video quizzes, I added discussion activities because I wanted students to explain the concept using their own words. So I also believe it's very often to develop a deeper understanding when they actually discuss ideas with others. So throughout this project, I also realized something important. Technology is like does not help to improve learning. So simply using Google Classroom or Playground does not automatically create meaningful learning. Actually, what truly matters is how these tools are designed and integrated. So when learning objectives, activities, and assessment work together, technology become a very powerful support for learning. So this is one of the biggest lesson I will take away from this project. So, and yeah, finally, I would like to end with one last thought. So before I could conclude everything, I would like to leave everyone with a very simple question. So if you were Form 2 students, would you rather learn acid alkalis by reading several pages from textbook, or would you rather watch video, explore colorful posters, answer interactive quizzes and discuss your ideas with your classmates? So I think most of the students would actually choose the second option. So this is what exactly I wanted to create. So if is there any questions, so you can ask me directly. And yeah, for to conclude my entire presentation for both project one and project two, there was with just one goal in my mind. The only goal was to make science more engaging through digital learning, and also have a learner center environment. So in project one, actually, it was a very interactive assessment throughout the way. But in project two, I tried my best to expand this idea by creating a very complete learner center learning environment using Google Classroom. Together, they provide students with opportunities to watch, practice, discuss, and also receive feedbacks throughout the learning process. So, most importantly, they actually encourage to become an active participant in their own learning. So, as a future uh, educators, I believe our responsibility is not only to teach content, like exactly like now we are educators, right? So our job is not only to teach the content, but actually we need to motivate the students to learn. Like they have to have their own responsibility to learn. So technology is not here to replace teachers. Instead, it actually helps us to become better facilitator who can support students in different way. So that's all. So thank you for now, and I hope like my project demonstrate how simple digital tools, when combined with thoughtful instructional design, can create more meaningful and engaging learning experience. So thank you very much for your attention. I truly appreciate your listening. So if there is any question, I would be happy to answer. Thank you.